Hello, I am in my not quite a bee shirt, so you know what that means. It is time to talk about some of the little teasers and previews that we've been given for Bridgerton Season 3. Usual disclaimers, I am not deep into fandom and fandom spaces, despite what you would think because I talk about Bridgerton a lot on this channel, but I kind of want to develop and have my own opinions, but I definitely want to talk about things and have conversations. I did a video last summer about the kind of like Bridgerton extended universe that kind of gets at some of that and the concept of translating this series in particular into a show and how it is, as I've mentioned again and again and again, the first time we've seen this kind of series, this kind of romance series put on screen in this way, and how we are kind of making the rules up as we go or learning the rules as we go in many ways. So anyway, if this is your first time popping onto one of my Bridgerton videos, hey, thanks for being here. But I am a longtime fan of the series in the sense that I read them when I was in high school. Bridgerton was one of the first series that got me into romance, and when I saw it announced as one of the Shondaland projects for Netflix, I first didn't believe that it was the Bridgerton as I knew it that was being announced, and then once I realized that it was ecstatic. So we are now on season 3, and there are many of us that are ecstatic about this project. I personally, in particular, am very excited for this season. I know that there was some contention in skipping over Benedict's story, but we are going back. I don't know in what order. I will be very interested to see what we are going to be getting narratively set up this season in terms of looking to the future, as well as this book and this story in particular. And it's been about a year since we found out that we were going to be getting Penelope and Colin next. It's been about a year since I sat down and talked to you about my feelings and thoughts about Colin and Penelope being next and what we were kind of looking at. And that video was received so much better than I ever anticipated, to be honest. So clearly there are people that are interested in talking about Bridgerton, talking about Colin and Penelope, and that's what we're gonna do here today. Before we dive all the way in, I know I just keep like teasing, but if you aren't subscribed, do that if you feel like it, no pressure. We're just inching closer to 1,000, and while I completely recognize your autonomy, sometimes it's nice to be asked. I'm glad you're here nonetheless. I'm glad you're interested in my opinions, but I obviously will be talking about Bridgerton more, season 3 more, so if you're interested, stick around. In that vein, we will be closer to release reading and talking about Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. I know I did a kind of takedown of Book Benedict about a year ago, or more than a year ago probably at this point as well, and I kind of intimated in that video that we would get to Colin, and we will, don't worry, because I'm very interested to see how Book Colin translates to the show. And one of the things that I have been most intrigued by in this kind of early tease lead up is Nicholas saying that a lot of the scenes that fans are anticipating are in the show, and mentioning that the show stays true to the source material, which to a certain extent, we already know places it's going to be deviating. We know that Penelope is going to have more suitors. We know that Colin is not going to be the first person to find out about Lady Whistledown. We know that Penelope doesn't have a younger sister, unless that like drastically changes, but I just don't anticipate that being the Featherington drama they're going to lean into this season. It does appear, based on some TikToks that Nicola has posted, that they are really staying with the bee theme of it all, which is very interesting. Obviously, we had the bee as a kind of teaser in season 1, and the bee scene in season 2, as different as it was from the book, that scene in the book series is one of the scenes that stands out most to fans, and I think in the show will continue to stand out. We've talked about that scene before, but I was interested. Now, granted, I'm not huge in my knowledge of insects, but Nicola posted a TikTok, and we will talk about some of her other TikToks, that seemed to show a bee. Correct me if it's a different insect, and maybe we will be kind of shifting, but it seems like we're really staying with the bee theme here. Now, having just read Elisa Kleypas' Mine Till Midnight, which is one I hadn't read yet, where another prominent bee scene takes place, bees are on the mind, and I guess I just never thought about all the times I've seen bees in historical romance. Maybe they're more prevalent than I thought. Maybe it's that thing where now that you're really aware of it, you're gonna see it everywhere. I don't know, but we've got bees. And that seems to be kind of like these through lines that are developing, and this kind of visual language we are developing, these little like hidden pieces. Now don't worry, we're going to swing back to the scenes that fans expect to be in the show of it all in a moment. But I would also like to talk about something that Nicola has also been talking about, is this idea of her character growing up. And I found it really interesting because in her conversations, and I'm not quoting anything verbatim, there seemed to be this kind of approach to it of her having to recognize that her character was going to make mistakes, was learning and growing, talking about how she was younger than her. And I found that really interesting. We're approaching these characters as a person, right? And this idea that they're gonna make mistakes. And I think that that has been one of the main contentions in the fandom or in fan response to Penelope. But I found the conversation about growing up really important structurally, because we saw Anthony set up in season 1, obviously, but we have been kind of tracking Penelope and Colin for 2 seasons now, which is part of the reason they talked about putting Colin and Penelope next. Now, granted, this is kind of like chicken and the egg, because clearly they were plotting it and anticipating this next because they were also building that out. But in a romance book, you're kind of seeing who's skirting the edges of the ballroom, right? Background characters or secondary characters start coming into the forefront more like 1 book ahead of time. And so you get the inkling, or they might even start planting seeds or the beginning of that romance. Going back to the Lisa Kleypas I just read, she did that in Mine Till Midnight. I haven't read the 2nd book in the Hathaway series yet, but she also did it in The Wallflowers. She did it in The Ravenels. I'm probably saying that wrong. Romance fans don't hate me. I read that series as it was coming out. I've read them all. But this idea of kind of how romance heroes and heroines come into the forefront in a serious romance, and this idea that suddenly the spotlight is on them. And in the book, we had Colin and Penelope, who were fan favorites by this point, and then thrust them into the spotlight. And if you've heard me talk about this book before, you know that I think it is a little bit lopsided as a book, because we are kind of like holding the cards close to our chest in terms of this reveal. And so there is a lot of work that doesn't happen because we're playing the secret of it all and we're trying to keep the reader in the dark. We don't have that going on in the show, but we do have these 2 seasons of character development that work a lot differently than in the book. In the book, we just get these kind of pithy moments. Colin's cracking jokes in the ballroom. We've talked about how he's a lot different of a character in the show than in the books. He's still kind of teasing with his family, but in a much different way. And we see him as kind of more serious presenting on the outside. He's trying to be taken seriously. And in the books, he's coming back from his travels and he's kind of a new man in some ways, but also is feeling very lost. And Penelope, meanwhile, is kind of the opposite. She has felt lost for so long and has kind of come into her own. She's accepted her place. She has this thing that makes her very independent. We don't really know where all of that independence and all that self-confidence has come from at the beginning of the book, but we get there. But at the same time, we don't truly know these characters until the start of their book. And so this comment about watching these characters grow up really kind of clicked something for me. I've talked about how the dramatic action of it has to be different. We have to kind of give these characters something to do. There has to be dramatic tension. There has to be conflict to keep things moving and to keep things growing. And I think that that has been some of the tension then against these characters as well, because anytime there is dramatic conflict, there is some kind of tension there, but there's also some potential discomfort in choices. Now, I'm not saying that Penelope has always made great choices. Let me be clear. But it's about how we're going to grow from that and also where those choices are stemming from. And so in this case, in the case of this translation to the show, we have to be moving with these characters in a much more active way than in the book, where we're just kind of watching them circle and we're like, we see you, we're ready for you, we will get to you, and then they come into focus. And in some ways, I think that the fan favorite of it all in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton works against them a little bit, because it doesn't feel like we get to know them quite as deep. While there's still a lot of emotional vulnerability there, I may be a little bit colored by the fact that I wanted to punch Colin in the face for a lot of the book. I do appreciate that we get to see some vulnerability and some insecurity from particularly Benedict and Colin, don't get me wrong. It's just how it's sometimes read to me on the page, and some of that is just like how far we've come since it was written. And so we're seeing that, I anticipate, updated. And we obviously left off in a much different place at the end of season 2. We have this idea I've heard talked about, I believe in interviews, but don't quote me, of this idea that Penelope is kind of ready to move on now. And I believe Nicola commented how this year or this season is the year that Penelope thought she was having last season. And I think there's something really interesting in that dramatic tension. And in terms of this kind of coming to the forefront, this kind of growing up, we of course have what is now kind of referred to as this like infamous Bridgerton glow up. I have trouble with that a little bit, only because we've only seen it happen once, but I do think that these first look pictures that we've gotten from Netflix kind of help put this into perspective. We're gonna start with Penelope, because as the Barbie movie says, she's everything and he's just Ken. I don't think that that's the exact quote or the exact tagline, but that's how I'm feeling right now, because I really enjoy Penelope. And I'll be honest, she was a fan favorite for me when I was reading these books. Listen, I've always been drawn to a wallflower. When I was a teen, I loved this idea of the ugly duckling in whatever way being able to step into her own and be noticed. Like, it's just something that I really appreciated. And the body representation has always meant a lot to me as well. So looking at this first picture of Penelope, one, I'm going to be paying attention to the makeup posts about this season way more closely than I have in the past. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of the same they've been using for a couple of seasons, but come on, she looks amazing. This glow is fabulous. Her skin looks fabulous. My first thought when I looked at this picture, my second thought when I looked at this picture was I noticed that red hair, blue eye combo. When I was a teen, Moulin Rouge was it, right? Moulin Rouge is still it to a certain extent, but I wanted that red hair, blue eye combo so bad. I am a very typical redhead, green eye combo. I promise myself we will not go there again, but she looks absolutely stunning. And I love the kind of wistful contemplation in this picture. It's both self-assured and sad at the same time. I just adore it. I think it is a wonderful image of Penelope. I also, without getting into like full-blown Bridgerton color theory, except for the little peaks of blue you can see beneath, love this dress on her. And it's very interesting because we talk about Penelope as a wallflower in a lot of ways, and part of her glow up in her book is this idea that she is getting to dress herself for the first time. So she's picking things that make her feel beautiful and that flatter her a lot more than what her mother picks out for her. And here I find it really interesting because obviously we've got that little peak of Bridgerton blue. We've got this beautiful cream on her. I am gonna have to go out and buy some cream things, I guess. I don't think I can be trusted with cream things though, so I'm not great with color theory. Someone tell me that my undertones will not serve this, please. But I find it interesting that this cream kind of blends into the wall a little bit. So in many ways, it's so flattering. It brings out Penelope in a way that is much different than we've seen her before, but in a way, we're still seeing her blending in or trying to blend in a little bit too. And there is a little bit to be said for Penelope blending in as Lady Whistledown. She is purposefully trying to blend in a lot of the time. So I think that that's very interesting. I think she looks gorgeous here. I love this picture. And then we have Colin. This reads to me, and I'm probably going to be completely wrong, but I'm going to put myself out there to be completely wrong. One, I really appreciate the details of his coat looking kind of worn in the sleeve because I'm anticipating, or I am reading this as him having come back from his travels. And the look in his face, it looks like you're just seeing someone for the first time in a way. So I'm wondering if this is him seeing Penelope after getting back, or kind of a moment of seeing Penelope in a new light or in a different way, or recognizing something different in her. And not to skip out on his whole glow up because he does look fabulous, but this kind of look in the eye, this kind of seeing the other person, seeing Penelope. I also want to talk about the first look picture. Well, we're going to talk about all of them, let's be real, but where they're looking at each other and it is both of them, like you can see both of their faces. I'm going to put it up. I don't know why I'm describing it to you like it is a mystery picture, but we've got a little bit of knowing in his eye. This kind of is building to me on that same idea of seeing someone in a completely new light and recognizing something new. And with Penelope, it almost looks a little shy, a little hesitant, a little flirty in a way. It looks like she's enjoying the moment, whatever it might be, but that she's not willing to completely buy in the same way that we have have seen her put herself out completely in the last 2 seasons. There's a little bit more self-assurance there in some ways, and so I'm very interested to see where in this season this falls. Also, Colin's outfit here, A+. I love it. And I wonder if we're going to play with gentleman's fashion a little bit more for Colin and even Benedict, because they are not as beholden to a title in some ways. So there's a little bit more freedom in how they present themselves, and there's more opportunity then to kind of display personality with clothing in a different way. I think that we obviously were still showing and communicating a lot about Anthony with his clothing and about Simon with his clothing. But I think that there's a different flavor that we're going to get for particularly, like I said, Colin and Benedict, who are just misters. I mean, not just, we love them, but there isn't that title that carries a lot of baggage. However, there is the baggage of not having the title as well. But because I promised myself, at least, that I wasn't going to be here forever, let's move on to the last picture. For obvious reasons, I think there is something so intimate in this glance, and I think being able to communicate a raw intimacy outside of like the steamier bits, which we have been told this is going to be the most scandalous season, which again, we will get to those scenes that we as book readers are anticipating as part of that. But I think being able to do the different levels of intimacy, and I think the scandalous of it all is going to be incredibly important and impactful this season as well. But I love seeing these kind of like moments. I think Colin being able to see Penelope in all ways is part of the real crux of their story and the kind of rawness of that. And that's part of the frustration I have with Colin in the book sometimes, is where his jealousy gets in the way of that. And that's part of the dynamic and the tension too, right? That's part of that dramatic tension that isn't always comfortable, but moves things along. I recognize it, don't worry. But this moment just feels so intimate because we don't even have to see all of Colin's face and all of Colin's look here. We see enough, but the way Penelope is looking back, where you can see like half the guard down, you can see the hope there, and you can see that she is being seen for not the first time necessarily. I don't want to hedge my bets that much, but there is just so much being said with this look. We also seem to have kind of like the inverse color story of her other dress, so I'm willing to believe this is further in the season because of the blue, and I would have potential guesses about where this picture may come from in the season, but I don't want to be wrong too loudly, so we'll circle back maybe, or maybe we'll never talk about this again. I don't know. But with that, there is always the possibility that this could come from one of the more steamy, scandalous scenes that fans of the book are anticipating, as have been hinted at with multiple quotes and images. Before we get to those scenes, which are the scenes I think have been hinted at for a long time, I would like to talk about 2 scenes from the book that I personally would love to see in the show that may or may not have been hinted at, may or may not be fan favorites. I'm not quite tuned in enough to know, and so I'm going to talk about them. The first being, of course, the Smythe-Smith musicale. At this point, post-Queen Charlotte, the Smythe-Smiths are canon in this universe, which means we could get a musicale. Does it need to be the opening of the book? No. Do we need to have a challenge issued at this musicale? No. Do we need to have Penelope hiding a pastry in a potted plant? No. I would love it, but I'll take what I can get. Now, have I latched on to this musicale in a way that is slightly ridiculous? Absolutely. But I also think it would be a great juxtaposition musically and visually from the start of the season to the end. Stay with me here for a second. We have the Smythe-Smith musicale somewhere at the beginning of the season, similar to it being at the beginning of the book. We have this notoriously discordant, kind of jumbled musical performance. The whole ton is dreading it, but they're also looking forward to it at the same time. It is a representation of the fish out of water story that we get with Penelope. We also get the moment where Penelope stands up for the Smythe-Smiths, and there's that kind of kindred spirit association there. Obviously, Penelope is still going to be heartbroken, or I would assume at the beginning of the series. She's lost her dreams of Colin, and she's lost her best friend. So there's going to be a lot emotionally going on there. Is she going to latch on to these other girls that are lost in their own way? Additionally, as I've been begging for since the initial Bridgerton trailer, we could then get a kind of discordant musical cover, this kind of off-kilter, off, you know, in whatever musical way. Remember, it's my brother that's the band teacher, not me, cover of something. And then being able to contrast that against later in the season, I would anticipate the kind of final ball, the engagement ball, the ball where all of the Lady Whistledown letters rain down, which I assume is going to happen in some capacity, mostly because think of the visual. Like, that is a visual that I don't foresee them passing up because it's just too good an opportunity. But think about how much character growth can be displayed and reinforced by other production design choices with these two events, should they happen. If I was in charge, they would happen. But if I was in charge, I don't know. I shouldn't be in charge, to be clear. This is moving into unhinged territory. I apologize. Next for our not scandalous scenes that I want to see. And keep in mind, we will be talking about all of these again when we read the book. But the parlor scene with Penelope, Colin, and her mother and sisters, and whoever they're married to at the time in the show, because I can't keep track of who's married to who. I just love that scene. I don't want to speak for all of us, but I think a lot of us appreciate that moment where like a love interest speaks up for their person, especially if that person is being discredited, especially if it's by the people that are supposed to love them most. And I think that we are setting up a much more complicated and rich dynamic between Penelope and Lady Featherington in the show. As much as I have been known to resent the extended Featherington plotlines as well, I think that there is a much more dynamic relationship between the two of them that we're going to see in this show, in the series in season 3, that is going to pay off on a lot of that, because we are seeing the choices and the machinations that she is making for her daughters, but we are also seeing how she is taking Penelope for granted, what Penelope is doing for the family, how she kind of mirrors a lot of those choices in some ways, and how we are seeing it kind of being forwarded what she may do. And we have seen the choices that Portia made in season 2, and how is Penelope going to act differently? Hint, she's going to fall in love, but we've seen those moments where Portia completely discredits any interest Colin may be showing in Penelope, or any idea that he may be a viable option from Penelope at any point. And so the vindication of that, it's just so delicious. I love that scene. There's comedy to it as you've got like all the oblivious players. You've got Colin like becoming a tighter string as every moment passes, and there's just so much going on there. I love it. I want to see it. Would it be improved with Portia trying to force Penelope's little sister to show Colin her watercolors because she is convinced that they are going to marry? Yes. Are we going to get that? We're not. We're not going to get it. But, you know, we can get some variation of it. And with that, let's talk about the other two scenes, or at least the two scenes that I think are the most important in terms of fan favorite scandalous scenes. Scandalous is what we're going with, I guess. I think that there's a lot of loaded language there that I'm not intending, but whatever. The carriage scene, obviously. We got the announcement for season 3 with the carriage scene. I don't think there's any way to not do the carriage scene. We haven't had a carriage scene of this kind yet. It's a perfect opportunity. It's already right there. But I think the more important scene here in terms of this conversation, and we've mentioned it before, is the mirror scene. Now, why do I think the mirror scene is going to happen? 1, Nicola has said mirror multiple times. She's referenced the mirror scene. She posted this TikTok that I'm going to put up. What is all around her? Mirrors. Why do I think this is incredibly important? Because in the book, to my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, we get a reference to the mirror scene. We get a reference to Colin wanting to make love to Penelope in front of the mirror. We do not get the realization of that desire. And I think that the realization of that desire is going to say something so important. I've mentioned this before, and there is a lot of vulnerability that goes into this, so I was never going to be mad if we didn't get this scene, because I always want to stress the comfort level of the actors. And Nicola has already talked about how this is really something that kind of pushes her out of her comfort zone, how she's friends with Luke and how they have to go into these incredibly intimate moments. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that. You are putting yourself on the line, and this is an incredibly earnest and romantic series, right? The romance is the point. So you have to be in those moments. And one thing that I've talked about again and again with this series that I so appreciate is how the actors take those moments seriously. The actors have read these books. They have done their dramaturgical homework, and I am so proud of them for that. I would give them a gold star if I was their dramaturg. I don't give gold stars as dramaturgs, but if I did, they would get one. So they're already entering this kind of really emotionally vulnerable space for both their characters and themselves, and then moving into this extra layer of vulnerability with this mirror scene, this idea that you are going to be completely on display, obviously artistically and tastefully for the screen in some way. But I also think this is so important because we are seeing the body diversity and the representation through Penelope in particular. We are not having a Penelope who in the book was intimated to have lost a lot of weight. Other people have read it as she just kind of grew into her body, she grew up, and she filled her form. But Penelope has always been considered a much curvier heroine than some of the others in this series. And so she's always been someone that I personally, as a reader, have gravitated toward for many reasons, including that representation. And so I think that that is going to be an incredibly powerful thing on screen. And I think the idea that this is going to be a steamier season is going to be important for a lot of reasons. The representation, yes, but also this idea that Colin overlooked Penelope for so long. And so that kind of hunger he has, no pun intended there, because Colin in the book is eating all the time. But it's this idea that we're kind of like making up for all the time he didn't see her. And based on where we ended in the last season, there is going to need to be some pining. There is going to need to be a little bit of groveling, potentially. He is going to have to work for it, I believe, a little bit more than in the book. What does all of that lead up to? More sexual tension that's then going to spill over. Now, that's not always the case, right? We had so much sexual tension last year. Now, to be fair, we don't know that all of the scandalous of the season is Colin and Penelope. We know that Anthony and Kate are still going to be a part of this season in a way that I anticipate is a decent storyline, so we still could get that second library scene. That's not necessarily a steamy scene, but it is a scene I love dearly, and we could be moving in this season into that newlywed phase that I missed from the show that I loved in the book. So maybe we're going to translate some of that into season 3 as well and kind of bleed those together. I don't know. But there is so much that is kind of on the table for this season, because we are still talking here about in context of the book. We've still had a whole conversation about some of the changes that they have potentially made. And I'm very interested to hear and to see and to think about how those changes are going to read on screen and what that means in context of hearing that they are still kind of doing the book justice or being true to the book in whatever way. Very intrigued by that. That may just be, hey, we're giving you the fan favorite scenes we know you want. I don't know, I guess we'll see. So obviously there's still so much more we could dig into here. We kind of glazed over everything and I talked way longer than I should have, all at the same time. So let me know what you're thinking about the kind of teases we've gotten so far. Let me know when you think this is coming, what you're excited for. I do also want to caution all of us though, if we do get season 3 yet this year, or regardless of when we get season 3, we have to kind of reconcile ourselves to the fact that we are going to be waiting for season 4 in some capacity because there is still a writer's strike on. So I don't know if they have started scripts. I don't know what shape those scripts are in, but we'll see. So maybe, fingers crossed, knock on wood, the strike will be over by then. I hope for these writers, I hope for the entire industry it is, because they need a fair deal. We are in this kind of really weird space, but that is going to impact things potentially. But we're not going to dwell on that. We are going to focus on season 3 and how excited we are for now. So let me know what you're excited about. Let me know what you think of what we've got so far. Thanks as always for hanging out and listening to my thoughts. Like, subscribe, comment, you know the drill, only if you're feeling it. I'm not your mom, but read something good, and yeah, bye.